Weirding Way Media.
So now that we're recording, Harris, now that we can have proof of it, you were doing this really good Forrest Gump impersonation before we started talking.
Not a chance. Not a
chance at all?
No, absolutely
wow.
not. It's sort of like doing De Niro in Taxi Driver. You just can't do it. It can't be done.
Really?
It's already done. No, it can't. Well, no, I respectfully decline.
Lieutenant Dan, you got your magic legs back.
Magic legs.
Magic legs.
I won't do the life is like a box of chocolates bit, but I can't wait to start talking about this. Looking forward to it.
So, Harris, we're talking about a movie that, well, let's just put it this way. There are going to be some hoops we're going to have to jump through before we really dig into this movie. But if you've clicked on this episode of the show, you know we're going to be talking about Forrest Gump. You know that I am the host of the Kulturecast, Chris Stachiw, and I'm joined by my good friend all the way from a taxi cab on the other side of town. He keeps his earphones on because he doesn't like to hear the noise, but he's a noise junkie. Your friend and mine, one of the hosts of that show over on the Weirding Way Media Network, your friend and mine, HP.
Thank you. He
has some strong opinions about music.
I love music. I love movies. I love it all. I'm a pop culture bon vivant.
Well, you picked a hell of a movie to talk about because not only is this movie based off of a book, it also started a restaurant franchise that is still in existence to this day, which is a thing that most movies cannot cop to. We're going to be talking about 1994's, I guess, classic film, Forrest Gump.
Paramount Pictures presents...
My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
The story of a man...
Are you stupid or something? Stupid is, stupid does, sir.
...who was good at just one thing. Life. Tom Hanks.
I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
Forrest Gump. Rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday, July 6th at theaters everywhere.
So it's directed by Robert Zemeckis, based on a book by Winston Groom of the same name. Screenplay is by Eric Roth, and it stars, well, if you've gotten to this point this month for Tom Hanksuary, you know who this movie stars. And Jesus Christ, even if you don't know who stars in this movie, you know who stars in this movie because I don't know how you couldn't know that Tom Hanks plays Forrest Gump, but he does. And this movie is all about Forrest Gump's life from the day that he's a boy until the day that he finds out he has a small version of himself who happens to be played by yet another child actor, Haley Joel Osment. Along the way, we meet Jenny, who totally isn't the worst part of this movie, played by Robin Wright, and Gary Sinise, who is he exists to teach the audience and the country a lesson. Also, Sally Field is in the movie, and McKelty Williamson does something with his performance that I think we'll be talking about. So, my friend, HP, you asked to be on this episode, my friend. You chose. You could have avoided Forrest Gump. So many people did. Our friend Heather, our friend Father Malone. Nobody wanted to sit and talk about good old Tom Hanks sitting on a bench for 2.5 hours. So, my friend, I will kick it to you. Why? Why are you here when no one else would be?
Well, I'm kind of surprised to hear that let me back up for a minute. I get the fact that Forrest Gump has become more problematic in recent years, in the last 5 to 10 years or whatever. But
are you saying Forrest Gump is a problematic film? What would lead you to make that statement? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Right. Well, but for me, and this is probably I'm for the purposes of looking at this movie, I'm purely looking at this in terms of I'm just looking at the story, the direction, the acting. Not to say that the other stuff shouldn't be considered, because I think these are always important things to consider. But for me, I will say that I am unabashedly I've been a big fan of Forrest Gump ever since I saw it in the theater in college that day in 1994. I just love the movie. I was a sucker for the sentimentality of it. I think Tom Hanks is at his most winning and most. I mean, it won him an Academy Award, so there's that. But and Zemeckis at his best, I think. I've always loved Zemeckis, Back to the Future, etc. So, unpopular opinion though it may be, I love this movie, and I'm very eager to talk about it.
So I read the book Forrest Gump by Winston Groom last year, and I enjoyed it. There are a fair amount of differences between the film and the book, and we will talk about them. One of them being the problematic thing about the movie, and I want to get it out of the way here. You didn't want to mention it. I completely understand why, but I will, because the character of Forrest Gump in the book is labeled an idiot savant. The character in the movie, and he's a self-ascribed idiot savant, but it is made very clear that he is, quote, an idiot savant in the book. Mm-hmm. In the movie, look, I know that they use the word retarded in the movie plenty of times. His character in the movie is slow. That's it. That's all. If you want to get upset about this movie and paint him as a, quote, retarded person, or whatever terrible term you want to use to try and find something about, there are plenty of things that are problematic about this movie. That is not one of them. And I will tell you why, in my opinion, because he is a character who understands still what is going on around him. He's not unaware of what's going on. And they make a huge point of that in the book, because in the book, he's the narrator of the book. And he even says, I know what I'm thinking. I know what I want to say. Just sometimes it doesn't come out right, which, again, it's very much clearly the same kind of character here in the movie. I understand that, you know, in days since the Robert Downey Jr. never go full retard, I get it. I understand that this movie is one of those movies that we are talking about when we talk about Tropic Thunder, at least theoretically. I think they're more talking about stuff like Mickey Rooney, or not? Is it Mickey Rooney playing Ed or whatever that Bill? My name is Bill.
Bill. Yeah. Oh, that was very cringy. And there was a movie that was on TV when I was a kid that you might have heard of called Like Normal People. Have you ever heard of this movie,
Chris? Is that the Rosie O'Donnell movie?
No, that one. I know the one you're talking about. This was a much older movie. This starred Sean Cassidy, the singer, the heartthrob, the teen heartthrob, and Linda Pearl. They played two mentally challenged young people that fell in love and wanted to be married, and against the wishes of their family and all that kind of stuff. But it really is the Robert Downey Jr. bit from Tropic Thunder. There's something really uniquely awful about, you know, I guess any kind of disability played by an able actor. And there's something egregious when we're talking about, you know, mentally challenged individuals. Now, the point you're making, I think, is very important with Forrest Gump, which is there's no mistaking the fact in the movie that he is slow, but he's called some names by some of the more sort of hateful people in the movie, but it's not played like these really like the Mickey Rooney playing Bill. It's not overplayed because, like you said, he's aware of who he is and what his limitations are, let's say, but that doesn't prevent him from being the best person he can be and from, you know, touching all of these lives that he touches. The book, which I read also, I actually read it not too long after I saw the movie back in the 94. And for me, the book was a little more in line with another book called Flowers for Algernon. Did you ever read that in school? Did you have to read that book? The book, and it was made into a movie with Cliff Robertson. And the book is a first-person narrative of a mentally handicapped individual named Charlie, who undergoes this experimental procedure that will give him basically, you know, I think it's above normal intelligence, but there's a consequence and there's a price to it. But the whole thing is written in the first person. So it starts off written very much from the perspective of somebody who has this handicap, this disability. And then he goes through this procedure and the way of writing changes and he becomes much more erudite and much more able to express himself. But then through the course of this procedure, he ends up reverting, basically, not to spoiler alert, it doesn't go well, and he reverts back to his original mental state. And it's sad when you read the book, because you can read his thoughts and how he's losing control of his mind again and all of this kind of stuff. But that's fine. But that's one thing I love about Forrest Gump, is they don't go overboard with that. They just portray him as being slower than everybody else, but that doesn't limit his potential, if you will.
Well, and you mentioned, and you didn't, I don't think you mentioned the role that I think Robert Downey Jr. is more or less taking to task specifically. And I think it's Sean Penn in Mystic River. I think that is the role, because I know he names off a couple names. Sean Penn and I Am Sam, I think, is what Robert Downey Jr. is more or less taking to task. But I want to get this out of the way now, because again, like, intellectually disabled and divergent is what Forrest Gump is, but at the same time, that's not what he is in the book. So there is this kind of weird difference. And Gump and Co., the sequel book that exists, and I guess I haven't read because it didn't sound interesting to me. He leads with the line of like, never let anybody make a movie about your life, to the point to reinforce that Winston Groom did not appreciate the changes that were made to the Forrest Gump character from book to screen, which is hilarious because, again, this book ends up becoming a really well-known movie, a really well-acclaimed movie that the creator probably doesn't like, in a way that Stephen King doesn't like The Shining. I mean, again, you've made some changes to the narrative to suit yourself, and hey, whatever. I think they work here. The characters are substantially different. All that out of the way, because again, I don't want anybody to come back at us and say, we don't know that this could be problematic. It's problematic for different reasons, and we'll get into them. And there's some things that this movie just kind of doesn't do. And it's like, well, yeah, this is the way it happened. It's like, that's not actually fucking not the way it happened. And there are some decisions that they make regarding the Forrest Gump character that I think are bigger issues than he is a slow person, which again, that is problematic, but we're just getting it out of the way here, that we understand that. All that out of the way, I had not seen this movie since I was a kid. I rewatched it now after, 20 plus years, and I enjoyed it. I think I'm with you. I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. I think Tom Hanks is really good. I mean, this movie doesn't work without Tom Hanks. I think it's a lot funnier than I remember it being. But I will tell you, I don't think an actress has played a more unlikable role in a film than since Sharon Stone in Casino than Robin Wright is as Jenny in this movie, because she is the worst part of the movie for me. She's a terrible character. And you ask yourself throughout the movie, Forrest Gump, what are you doing with this psychotic human being? Mind you, I understand there's a lot of things that go into her character, but the way she's presented in the movie, there is no believable way you as an audience member can get behind her as a character, because all she does is hurt the main character of the movie. And she is so, anytime she shows up in the movie, she grinds the progress and the flow and the vibe of the movie to a fucking halt. She grinds it to a halt, because you have to check back in with that story and the story of Forrest Gump just going through his kind of, rumspringing it kind of is. It's like him finding out about the world and, leaving his home, but then he comes back and then he leaves again, then he comes back and then he leaves again. Like, it kills the flow of the movie, and it adds an hour almost that the movie doesn't need. You could have gotten this movie under 2 hours, and I think it would still work. Tom Hanks would still be as good as he is, because he's good with or without Robin Wright. I don't have any issue with Robin Wright as an actress, but this role in this movie does not add to the movie. And yeah, she's an unlikable character in the book, but in the movie, she's just, every time she shows up, I'm just like, I check out of the movie completely. She's a terrible human being.
She is, for sure. She's the most in my opinion. Also, I share your opinion that she's the most problematic character in the movie for a variety of reasons. Like we'll get to, maybe we'll talk about what she represents, the character represents to some people. But if we're going to put that aside, at least for the moment, let's look at her purely as a character in the story. I agree with you. She really does nothing but hurt Forrest over and over and over again until she finally decides, after she's, spoiler alert, she has Forrest's son, and decides to not only to tell him, but decides the time is right to marry him and settle down for reasons that we can get into story wise. But yeah, it's tough because I agree the movie does spend an inordinate amount of time with this character, and it's hard to see well, I can tell you that Forrest, obviously, if I'm looking at this from another perspective, obviously she is the only person outside of his mother as a child who showed him any sort of kindness. So I guess we can say that maybe that's where this all sort of springs from, but certainly she just spends scene after scene after scene rejecting him when all he wants to do is worship at her feet and make her happy and be with her. And that's part of what is sort of sad. That's one of the many sad turns, I think, that Forrest Gump as character goes through. But this movie, again, it can't be overstated. This movie wouldn't nearly be as successful if it didn't have Tom Hanks in this lead role. I was actually, who would have had the star power at that point? And it was hard for me to think of anybody. I guess you could say it's a stretch. No, Tom Cruise wouldn't be right because he's too Tom Cruise. He's too suave. He's too handsome to really make it work. But let me ask you, Chris, who would you, if you had to recast this of the time period, who would you have? Who could possibly have played Forrest Gump instead of him?
Oh, honestly, only one actor kind of springs to mind. And well, there's two. One is an actor that I know was considered, and that's Travolta, because this is like peak Travolta in dramas and in serious movies. And he was the original choice. But the person, let me put it this way, the person that I envisioned when I read the book, even though I know Tom Hanks was cast in the movie, and this is the person that Winston Groom claims the character he would have had cast, was John Goodman. And I totally believe that, because again, the character, that's the other thing that kind of we didn't mention. The character of Forrest Gump in the book is like 6'4". He's like a giant. Honestly, better question would be, who would you cast as Forrest Gump now? There's one actor, Alan Ritchson, the guy who plays Jack Reacher, would be perfect for the role of Forrest Gump if you did it now. And like you could imagine him having that like childlike wonderment about him, but at the same time being, because again, the reason nobody fucks with him is because he's a physical presence, even if he is, quote, in the book, an idiot savant, but he's gigantic. And in the book, he's having sex with all kinds of people. He's banging all kinds of people. They like sanitize the book in a way that makes the character of Forrest Gump more palatable for an audience of people that the movie is made for. Because this is a hot take, but it's not a hot take. Forrest Gump is a boomer's wet dream. It really is. It is a sanitized version of the history of a certain generation of people, the way they wish things had been, the way they wish things had played out, the way that they made money in the 80s, but they were altruistic with it and they gave it away as opposed to keeping it all for themselves, that they were able to be vocal about Vietnam, even though they completely undermined that scene intentionally. Because again, they undermine a lot of the, quote, emotional moments of this movie to prove a point, maybe, ? I'm not sure. But this movie is an idealized version of history the way it didn't happen. And the thing that bugs me the most about that is the way they treat the Vietnam War, because it's a fucking joke in a lot of ways. Forrest never even kills anybody. Forrest never even picks up a gun and shoots at anybody. And it's like, you can do this, but you can't do it that way and get the same emotional resonance out of it that a character who is put in this scenario who would never do something like this has no choice but to do it. And the movie goes, well, but he's simple and he's such a nice person. He wouldn't do that. And it's like, I don't give a shit who he is. If he's in the jungle with the Viet Cong, he's shooting at people because that's why he's there. And the movie decides to like sanitize some of the more interesting moments from the book. Look, they take things from the book and they get rid of it completely. Remember when Forrest Gump went into space with an orangutan? That was the thing. Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing that happened in the book. Thank God it didn't happen in the movie. But they do make a lot of changes in the movie from the book that I think make this movie in a lot of ways. Now it almost plays like satire because it's so idealized and so not really the way things happened that it's like, Jesus Christ, movie. Like, come on. Some of these things could never have happened this way, even if you wanted them to.
Sometimes when we think of movies or people look in and read things into movies, for me, it becomes a little bit like a magic eye picture. Remember magic eye pictures where you had to kind of squint in a certain way and you could see, like it was in Mallrats. Remember, I see a sailboat and he could never see Ethan Suplee could never see it. I'm not going to come down on anybody for reading. I'm sure the subtext is there if you look hard enough, and it's hard for me to argue with that. Certainly, it was incredibly sanitized from the book. That there's no disputing that the character of Forrest Gump was markedly different. He was foul-mouthed in the book, and like you said, he's having sex everywhere. He's on these weird adventures. At one point, doesn't he meet Raquel Welch to like with the creature from the Black Lagoon or something?
He's in the suit at one point in the book.
Right.
And also we kind of mentioned the orangutan in space thing. If you thought that was the craziest part of the book, the space shuttle that they're in crash lands in Papua New Guinea, and you spend like 3 chapters in Papua New Guinea with Forrest and an ape just hanging out with the natives. And it's like, what the fuck is this book? But again, like the movie is so different because the movie's only the first like 11 chapters of the book. You know, they kind of forget all the other stuff. I think rightfully so, but the things that they do choose to forget that I have a problem with are massive changes to the character.
Yeah, and I agree with what you were saying about how the Vietnam War in particular is treated, because the only thing we ever really get out of that is it's a moment of pure heroism for Forrest, because that's the moment at which he goes in and like retrieves every member of his platoon under, bullets whizzing everywhere, and he's carrying people out as the napalm is rolling in. Certainly that's no one's idea of a definitive, view of what Vietnam really was. But I'm still going to lean on this idea that it's, I didn't come to Forrest Gump, and certainly the audience in the time didn't come to Forrest Gump for an incisive dissection of what it meant to grow up in the 60s and to, what did this all mean? With 30 years of retrospection behind you, it was more lighthearted than that. Yes, it did tug at the heartstrings of many, including myself. I'm not ashamed to admit, even now when I watch it, there's 3 or 4 big story beats that still get me every time, and we can talk about those when we get to them. But I'm never going to put someone down for I mean, you can take it to extremes, but people will see in it what they want to see in it. And I can only imagine, like, I'm not sure that this was anything that Eric Roth or Bob Zemeckis had in mind when they were making it. Does that mean that these impressions, that these, thoughts of what the movie really meant, these suppositions are meaningful or meaningless? I don't know. But I'm trying to look at this movie, and like you, I hadn't seen it in forever. But I still, when I do watch it, because I see it every once in a while, I try to look at it with just from purely like, does the story move me? Is it funny? Is it sentimental? Yes. All of the above. Is it well directed? Yes. Is it well acted? Obviously. So I'm choosing to judge it on those merits, but maybe I should dig in a little deeper. Maybe I won't like what I find, but that's part of our discussion here, I suppose.
Let me ask you something. If you view, because again, I think you're right to view this movie apolitically and is probably the right way to do it. But I honestly push back on that, and I'll tell you why. So Forrest Gump, on the spectrum of political leanings, if this man were alive today, right, a man like Forrest Gump, he is conservative, yes. His values lean in a conservative direction. He's a good God-fearing man who talks about God plenty, loves his mama, and has a, quote, hardworking life that allows him to achieve the American dream. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm going to read into anything, I'm going to say that, yes, he's a conservative's wet dream, because on the flip side of things, maybe you're getting to this, I apologize if I'm interrupting, but you can also make the case very easily that Jenny represents all of the other stuff, the hippie part of the equation. While Forrest Gump is going to war for Uncle Sam and for our right to be free, she's, playing Joan Baez songs at a strip club. She's trying to be free love. She's doing drugs in the 70s. She's, basically every bad, it's every conservative's nightmare what the Jenny character represents. And of course, because of that, she's the one who has to be punished in the movie, so to speak. And the way the movie does that is she catches some, I think we're meant to believe
it because it's important.
It's obvious. It's obvious. I think the filmmakers have pushed back on this, but I always read it, and I'm sure most people did, that she gets AIDS.
Eric Roth a couple of years ago said that it is AIDS. Okay. The screenwriter did for this version of the movie, obviously, because Winston Groom claimed that it was meant to be Hep C, which would make more sense. But again, because if it's AIDS, like you said, and you did beat me to the punch, but you're completely right. I'm glad you picked up with where I was going. Jenny is the ultimate liberal per the conservative belief in the 70s and 80s, right? I mean, I was commenting on this while I was watching it with one of my close friends. We were talking about how every time Jenny shows up, she's literally a stereotype of that decade she's in. In the 70s, she's free love, man. And then in the 80s, it's the me decade. And, we're going to be talking about Bonfire of the Vanities here pretty quick to round out the month. But it made me laugh because it was like someone read Tom Wolfe's essay and was like, I need to this is the character right here. They're doing drugs and focused on themselves and blah, blah, blah. And then what happens? What happens? She tries to reform her life the way they being Forrest and by extension, possibly a more conservative mindset. And what happens? In the end, she has a kid and then she passes away because she got AIDS from her bad decisions. Newsflash, everybody. If she had AIDS, she gave their child AIDS. And that, my friends, is a horrifying thought to think about subtextually with this movie, because if it is AIDS, which the movie, like you said, more or less hints at, she has a virus that they don't know how to cure in the early 90s. Whatever could that be? Or I guess it would have been the 80s. That's AIDS. And what's funny is the movie is Reagan-esque in its inability to say AIDS in a lot of ways. It's very indicative of the time and the culture that this movie is representing itself as taking place during, because this movie isn't taking place in 94. It's taking place in, I think, 81 at the beginning of the movie. So it's telling. And like you said, maybe it's not intentional, but it doesn't feel not intentional. The character of Jenny is so liberal leaning, such a stereotype, such a caricature, even that don't forget, kids can get AIDS by being born from someone who has AIDS. That's a thing. And so for the movie to be like, well, she died, but hey, it's okay because Forrest is taking care of his son. It's like, except for the fact that that child probably is going to live a terrible life and have to suffer more than others would because of bad decisions of someone else. Maybe that's a further comment on, the sins of the mother being revisited on the child and however you want to put it. But it does feel a little tongue clicking, a little condemnation-y that it's like, hey, Jenny, making bad decisions by living your life the same way Forrest did. She's living her life the way she wants. He lived his life the way he wanted. But the movie makes a judgment call on that. Right. And that's the problem.
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind is we're talking a lot about, well, maybe this was their intent, or maybe this was, what I believe a movie, I don't believe anything happens in the production of a movie by accident.
No, fuck.
Right?
No.
Or very little happens. Everything has to be because you're trying. A filmmaker like a Zemeckis or like a Spielberg is not in the business of offending their audience or doing things that might be misconstrued. So I have to believe that every decision down to every little nook and cranny of what goes into the story of this movie is worried over again and again and again and refined and sanded and polished. So to your point, I think the omission of the idea that she has AIDS it can only be thought of as completely intentional, because if it's so obvious to the average film goer that that's exactly, the time period fits, the description of what she's going through, as vague as it is, fits. So I can only assume, and it's dangerous to assume, but we can only assume at this point that it was completely by intent that they did not name it, out. They didn't call it out by name. They just left it vague for whatever reason. Maybe it was a Reagan-esque type of thing where they are falling into the same traps that some of these Republican stalwarts did, at the same time period. That's probably the case.
And Eric Roth, in an interview, and I'm not making this up, you can take this to the bank. He said, and I quote, "The second movie was going to start with his little boy having AIDS and people wouldn't go to class with him in Florida. We had a funny sequence where they were desegregating busing in Florida at the same time. So people were angry about either the busing or their kid having to go to school with a kid who had AIDS. So there was a big conflict." Yeah, hilarious. What a funny situation to put your characters in.
That's a knee slapper. Yeah, because look,
hardy har. I mean, there is precedent for that happening, obviously, in the 90s. So
yeah, no, it's authentic, but I don't necessarily go to a Robert Zemeckis movie to be bummed out like that. But let's be honest.
I've got plenty of Zemeckis movies we could show you that would bum you out for the wrong reason. Well, you ever seen Beowulf?
No, but I've never seen it. I wanted to because I was early on. I was a big 3D movie guy. That's just one that I missed because I don't know why I missed it.
Yeah,
but
you made the right choice.
Well, Crispin Glover? Didn't he play Beowulf in the movie? Or
he plays I think he plays Grendel.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's Ray Winstone is Beowulf, the actor who plays Indy's totally not traitorous pal in Indy 4 that ends up going no. Poor Ray Winstone was in The Departed, and then for American audiences, they don't know him from anything else other than that Indiana Jones.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But now you're making me want to see Beowulf. You see exact opposite effect here.
Oh boy, I fucked up.
but in terms of there is some hinky stuff, for lack of a better term. I don't like that term, but there's some awful stuff that goes into Forrest Gump. Let's not overlook the fact that among the other bad things that happened to Jenny, I mean the chief among them, through no fault of her own, she's abused horribly by her father in Alabama. And that's kind of the thing that bonds them, because, she's desperate not to go home because her drunk father is going to, and I think it's basically spelled out that he's sexually abusing his daughter, which is awful, terrible. But somehow, so what I guess the point I'm making is what you're describing, the potential sequel. Yeah, that's really bad. But let's not overlook the fact that there's some really awful stuff that happened in the first Forrest Gump that we didn't dwell on. It was there, but and if you want to look at it and think about the implications of it, it's pretty awful. But there's some of that in Forrest Gump. But to your point, most of it's sanitized or soft pedaled a little bit for the audience.
Are you talking about the terrible things like all of those inserting of Tom Hanks into the historical footage? Because that's pretty terrible. You're right, Forrest. You're right, Forrest Gump, everybody. That movie is terrible. That part of the movie is so bad that it honestly is hard to overlook.
The effects didn't age well. I can tell you.
Were they good at the time?
They were. I mean, because you have to understand. Look, I'm not sure that the John Lennon scene for me is always the worst, because they have his lips moving to say the lyrics to Imagine, basically, and it doesn't work.
No, I thought it was really clever, and I thought it was really smart. I like how they were probably just sitting together let's do something really cute with the Beatles. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Oh my fucking God.
It was rather unnecessary, but that became kind of one of the main hooks of the movie, the state of the art effects. And I'm not going to sit here and say it blew my mind in the way that a Jurassic Park, when that first came out, was kind of a mind blower. But I will say in the time, 94, going to see this in the movies, it wasn't egregiously. It didn't look egregiously bad to me. I will say the popping into the historical footage didn't age well. But what I will say is the stuff with Lieutenant Dan and his amputated legs, I think that stuff still works really, really well, to the point where I think there's even people like latter day viewers that are still convinced that, Gary Sinise doesn't have legs, because I thought that stuff that was very cleverly done. But him, shaking hands with JFK and having conversations with, Richard Nixon and stuff, that I'm not going to defend that, because that just doesn't look very good. But for the time, I mean, this is almost 30 years ago now. So, it was fine in its day, but it wouldn't pass muster these days.
I was more talking about LBJ looking like a melting candle man, because that the LBJ one, I think, is the Lennon, the John Lennon one is bad. And I think the John Lennon one is bad because the movie's trying to be cute. And it's like, we get it, movie, but it doesn't really work. But the thing with LBJ, it's like, how many more times do you need to do this? Because it's like, you've done it with Kennedy, you did it with Nixon. Like, I don't like LBJ, like the LBJ one was a step too far. And I know the Nixon one came later, but the LBJ one was so long and extended. It's like, show me your butt. I'd like to see your butt. And it's like, why did anyone think that this needed to go on this long?
That, even in the time, like I remember being a little, I mean, it's a stupid, cheap joke, but I didn't understand what they were getting at, where LBJ is asking him to see his war wound on his butt. It didn't make, I mean, the Nixon thing is kind of funny because he's making reference to Watergate, whatever. But the LBJ thing, you're right, it did go on too long, and it didn't really seem to have much place other than a cheap laugh. That's all I got out of it. I mean,
I felt like, and again, because the whole thing with Forrest Gump is that he keeps showing up at these kind of crucial points in time. He shows up at the stand in the schoolhouse door where he gives Vivian Malone Jones her book back. And then, he meets LBJ, he meets Nixon, he meets Kennedy, he goes and talks to Lennon on the Dick Cavett show. But the thing at Watergate, that was that may have been just like, movie, please, because I see people over there in that suite. It's like, I don't know. Again, in a lot of ways, it's like wish fulfillment, right? Like, I wish I could have been the one to take down Nixon. Like, I wish, it's like, again, like this movie is wish fulfillment. I wish I could have bought Apple stock in the 80s or the 70s whenever he buys it. Like, again, like, it's a lot of wish fulfillment. It's a wet dream for a certain, I don't even want to say boomers, a certain generation, because I'm not even sure it is boomers technically. I think it's the generation that's a little older than them. Because again, like, Forrest is such a altruistic, pure good at his core. He is essentially, and I think I mentioned this while I was watching, he is God. Forrest Gump is God as far as I'm concerned. The way he's presented, he is a God, not Christ-like, but a God-like figure, because he just goes around fixing everybody's problems and doing good by everyone, regardless of who they are or what they've done to him or otherwise. Again, he is unconditionally in love with Jenny, someone who treats him like garbage from the moment they become adults, quote unquote.
The thing with Forrest, I agree that you can't argue with the fact that he's portrayed as this sort of beatific, ideal, perfect, nice guy who's pure of heart, right? But there's one moment that I always thought that could have, for me, it made him just a little bit more complex. That I remember watching it in the movies and thinking, well, this movie could take a turn right now. And there's a scene where it's after he comes back from Vietnam and he meets up with Jenny again at the reflecting pool. And after that, like they're at a party with the Black Panthers and a bunch of other radicals, because of course that's where Jenny has found herself, like with this
makes
element,
sense,
or at least, I mean, I guess it's a matter of perspective in the eyes of the filmmakers and perhaps by extension their ideal audience. The Black Panthers were very, very scary bunch to hang around with. That doesn't mean that they don't have a place in history. Let me get that out of the way. But anyway, I digress. The thing that I always thought, at one point, her boyfriend at the time hits her, and on the soundtrack is All Along the Watchtower by Hendrix. And it's in slow motion where you see there's something that comes across Forrest Gump's face that looks a little more savage. And like the lighting just kind of looks in a certain way where you I kind of had the feeling in that moment, Forrest Gump might tear this guy limb from limb because he crossed the line and hit Jenny in front of. I always thought that was kind of an interesting moment because it's maybe the one time in the movie where you see like the sort of simple pretext kind of fall from his face. And he becomes almost a little bit, I don't know, like brutal and savage. Like I said, like a line has been crossed and he might do anything at that point. You don't know. Now, the scene goes nowhere. I think he beats the guy up a little bit and then he gets kicked out of the Black Panther party. But I always thought that movie could have used a little more of that shading. There's even a scene where he's in training for the army. And it's during the scene where Bubba's going through his whole litany of shrimp salad, shrimp burger, shrimp whatever. And you see Forrest is like assembling his rifle. And the sergeant even says, well, that's a new company record. Like clearly Forrest has an aptitude with this rifle. And you kind of, I kind of get a sense like, well, this guy could have been Lee Harvey Oswald or something. There's something interesting there that they don't do anything with. But if you watch it, it's kind of an interesting twist to the character that, hey, he's actually really handy with a rifle. I always thought that was kind of interesting.
Maybe the Charles Whitman type.
Right. Like he's so pure. Those are the only moments where I thought there was any hint of any sort of shading of darkness to the character, especially when he's trying to defend Jenny from this radical who's beaten her right in front of him. I always thought the movie could have used more of that. And
of course, it's a radical. Of course, it is. Of course,
right? Of course, he's fighting for what's right. There's nothing, Vietnam. We were completely justified in Vietnam. Come on, I mean, it was, but
I was just doing my duty, man.
Hey, no, and like I said, we can go down these rabbit holes of what the movie may or may not have been trying to say, as far as like the radicals versus conservatives during that time period, and that's completely valid. But part of me just is trying to judge the movie purely on its storytelling merits. I know it's hard. It's damn near impossible to put all of that aside, and I can't necessarily. I'm not sure I'm very successful at it myself, but just purely on its merits. Let me ask you, like we've been talking about this a little bit, dancing around it here and there, but let's talk about something that's purely good about the movie, and that's Tom Hanks's performance. We already agree that no one else could have done it at like he did it. He was at a peak in his career. But given this character who's almost impossible to play, I think he did. He clearly did as good a job as anybody could have done. What's your impression of his performance, purely on a performance basis?
I think Tom Hanks is really good. Obviously, I think he, I think maybe it is a little hyperbolic to say only he could have done the role, and I've said it, and you've said it, and I think we could both say that only knowing that we are in the universe where Tom Hanks did play the role, and therefore I can't see anybody else do it. But I think Tom Hanks is great. Tom Hanks, obviously, Father Malone and I joked on the Mazes and Monsters episode about this, but Tom Hanks essentially had his In Memoriam directed by Robin Zemeckis, because this will be what they show for him at the Academy Awards when he passes away, will be him sitting on that bench with the feather, because this is the Tom Hanks role when you think of Tom Hanks. And if we're talking the world knowing Tom Hanks, this is the Tom Hanks role. He is the idealized American of that generation, and he plays it to perfection. I think for me in this, because I watched it twice for this episode, the role that sticks out for me, the role that I resonated with more, and I think the role that's more interesting, but it also isn't ever present in the movie, is Gary Sinise as Lieutenant Dan. As much as we could say, well, Forrest can only be played by Tom Hanks, Gary Sinise is Lieutenant Dan as much as Tom Hanks is Forrest Gump. And I saw that there was another name kicked around for Lieutenant Dan. It's a man who likes to have his ass eaten, as they would say. The one Pesci? And only. It's Joe Pesci.
That I could not even imagine that. But you're right, though. Lieutenant Dan has the much more interesting, because he has an actual redemptive arc, right?
He has an arc. Forrest doesn't have one. No,
Forrest really. And by the way, as a side note, can I tell you how jealous I am that I didn't get to do the Mazes and Monsters review, because that is one of my all-time favorite. Forget about Tom Hanks movies. I love that movie with, I just can't even tell you. Him as Pardue, the holy man, and the journey that we go on with Hanks and Chris Makepeace from Meatballs. Chef's kiss. Wow. Anyway.
Well, you got mentioned on the episode. Don't think you weren't mentioned, because a certain two-lettered human being mentioned that he watched that movie with you. So fret not, HP. You were mentioned, my friend.
I love it. It's one of, anyway, we're not talking about I have
the less said about that movie, the better. I'm kidding.
I love it. But anyway, back to Lieutenant Dan. Yeah, I could not agree with you more. Gary Sinise really is kind of the heart of the movie when you really think about it, because and obviously it's because of the intersection I should say, of his life and Forrest's. Like, they're so inextricably linked, and Forrest is really the one who brings him along and shows him that there's more to life than being bitter and hateful about his lot in life. But Gary Sinise plays it beautifully. Like, he goes from being that lieutenant in the Army, completely, desperate and bereft of any hope, to, and you really believe that these guys kind of come together, and Forrest kind of cajoles him in his own way into joining him on the shrimp boat. And it's a thing of beauty to see them act together and go through that journey together, but particularly because Lieutenant Dan is so deserving of a happy ending after everything he's been through.
Well, and that is the thing about Gary Sinise. And look, McKelty Williamson, I think the Bubba character, I think if you want to talk about a character that maybe is problematic in the movie, the way that people talk about Forrest being problematic and that role, I think McKelty Williamson's role kind of verges closer to that, but I still think it's fine. And I don't think it's any issue the way anyone wants it to be. But you almost want more of them together, obviously. But I think, like Lieutenant Dan, he's a more interesting character because he has an arc, even if he's not on screen for it. He has an arc as well. And I think that's maybe the thing about this movie that gets forgotten, is that, yes, it's the Forrest Gump show, and yes, it's the Tom Hanks hour, and he is the sole driving force throughout this movie. But the better parts of this movie, I don't think, have very much to do with him. I think it's who he's playing off of in those scenes, because the scene that he has with Gary Sinise on that boat, and he's like, I never said thank you for you saving me. And then Gary Sinise just drops off the boat and swims off. Like, that's a poignant moment. It's not the most poignant moment in the movie. The most poignant moment in the movie for me does have to do with the Jenny character. And let me ask you, what's your most poignant moment in the movie?
So, there's really two, and they both have to do with Jenny. The first, I'm cheating a little bit by picking two, because there's, I can't boil it down to one. I just can't do it. The first one for me is the moment where she's taken. So the movie has caught up to itself. He's been at the bus stop waiting for the bus that's going to take. We now know that he's going to go to Jenny's house. He's bringing the chocolates to her. So he gets there, and she reveals to him that she has this child. And, he's blown away by the fact that it's his child. And there's a moment where he says, is he like me, implying, like, is he slow? There's something in the cry in his voice and the reaction of, or the way that Tom Hanks plays it, that always gets me, because it's further evidence that he is self-aware. He knows that he has these limitations. He's not smart like everybody else is, which is what he says. But there's something, the twist in that moment where he all of a sudden is afraid. Oh my God, what if I have passed down my limitations, my slowness, so to speak, to this beautiful child standing in front of me? I find that poignant. I've always have. But obviously the big, the real tear-jerking moment is when he's delivering his sort of monologue at her graveside. And there's a moment where he's talking about his child, and he's saying how smart he is. And in that moment, he breaks down and he starts crying a little bit. That, to me, that's one of those moments that always gets me. I'm not going to say I sit there and bawl my eyes out, but in the movie, in the movie theater in '94, I'm not ashamed to say that because
why are you ashamed that you cry? Wait, I want to ask, why would you be ashamed that you're crying? I don't cry during no goddamn movie. How dare I resonate with something so deeply?
Not that, just that the overt sentimentality of it.
I know you well enough to know that that's not the way you are.
You know what I mean? But like certainly in '94, when seeing this movie for the first time, I probably did shed a real tear or two in that moment at the end, because it's been this now this movie is so familiar that there's no surprise. We watch it and we know all the beats. At least I do. But having gone through that sort of long arc of his life and everything he's gone through, because it in its time, it wasn't a short movie either. It's kind of a long movie. I want to say it's somewhere north of a couple hours, which was long back in those days. But those two are the most poignant, tear-jerking moments. How about yourself?
I mean, it's the exact same. But what's funny is like it has nothing to do with Jenny in those moments. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like even then, like it's more about the self-realization and self-awareness of this character coming through in a way that the movie has no interest in showing, more or less, up until that point. I mean, we don't see moments like that other than those two moments. And I think it's intentional. I think it's smart, but it also, it kind of feels like an afterthought in a way. It feels like there's like 5 minutes left and now he has a son. Do you know what I mean? And again, like the way the narrative plays out, I get it, and again, him getting married to Jenny at the end is from the book, and there is all of that, all that's great, all that's fine, but you almost want more of Forrest and his son by the end of the movie, because again, like they're so good together, those two actors, because again, you have a child actor who knows what he's doing, even if he is like 5 years old. I mean, Haley Joel Osment, it's only a couple years before he's in, I guess, one of the most famous child actor roles of all time, a child actor role that carries a movie harder than most movies are carried by the adults in the movie with The Sixth Sense. But, those two moments are just so heartbreaking. And like you said, it's because he's asking the question that anyone would ask if they were in that scenario, which is he like me? And knowing what that means, that's an important question to ask, but it's a question that he would always ask. The character like that would always ask that question because it's part of his core being, is being who he is and accepting who he is, not as a detractant, but it's just part of who I am. But it's in that moment where he realizes for that split second that he can, like you said, be self-aware about what it means to actually be him and hoping that someone else doesn't have to shoulder the same kind of responsibilities that he does.
Right. And the character, but it's interesting because in both of those cases, he allows himself that moment of breaking down slightly. But if you notice, like very quickly afterwards, like she assures him that no, he's the top of his class. He's very smart. Like the character really composes himself and kind of girds himself very quickly. And there's that great moment where he sits at the TV with him and they kind of cock their heads at the same time. But a similar thing happens, when he's at the graveside talking about the child to his dead, at the grave of his dead wife. And, he kind of like, he's just such a good fucking actor. Tom Hanks is able to play this and then make it believable of someone who just kind of shakes himself off a little bit. And he's like, all right, I'm gonna, now I have to be a dad again and I'm going to get up and leave. And I don't know, there's just something, really beautiful. And even like, I'm going to add a third one to that. Another sort of poignant moment, which does gets me more now that I'm a parent, which is the very simple notion of Forrest taking his son to the bus and sitting there and saying to his son, I'll be here when you get back. And just something so beautifully, touching about in that moment of a father who is so devoted to his son. All they have is each other. And you're left with that image of Forrest sitting on the stump where the feather, I think, pops out of the book, and that takes us out of the movie. But it's just really, really beautiful. And that's not even just him selling it as an actor. That's beautiful writing, I think, too.
My favorite moment in the movie is the Forrest Gump running montage. I think for me, it's the thing that of all the things that I remember from this movie, there's two things. The fact that this movie has a goddamn restaurant named after it, which will never not be funny, because I feel like that is one of the ways that this movie has culturally ingratiated itself internationally, is by, being a food franchise, a food, a restaurant named after Forrest Gump is still existing in 2023, and that's never changing, which is crazy. But the other thing about this movie, the other kind of thing that blows my mind about this movie is that, ultimately at the end of the day, like I don't like it. The movie is trying to do something that not a lot of movies try to do. And the movie is trying to, in a lot of ways, have its cake and eat it too. It wants you to understand that the character of Forrest Gump more or less almost even understands that he's in a movie in a lot of ways. It kind of feels like, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of it that feels like he's self-aware, but like you said about the scenes towards the end of the movie, they have to strip him of his self-awareness very quickly because otherwise him being the narrator of the story, it feels a little bit like and then, but very much a little bit of winking to the audience too. And I'm always impressed by, like you said, by the end of the movie, we have a character sitting and waiting for his son on a bench. And that's how the movie wraps up. And by the end of the movie, you just go, okay, like I've completely bought into all of this. And I think that's the success of the movie is, like you said, even though it has these kind of like political issues and some leanings and directions that maybe haven't aged well, by the end of it, the movie has more or less made you forget about all of that just based on Tom Hanks's performance. And like, there are very few films where I'm completely on board based off of one person's performance.
It's amazing. It's still, even like we said, almost 30 years later. I think next year is the 30th anniversary, or will be the 30th anniversary. And with all of the additional baggage that the movie has taken on in that time period, it's still the idea can't be lost that this is a very well crafted movie. This is a movie made to be appreciated by a mass audience. This isn't something, like I said, Zemeckis isn't trying to push buttons in the sense that he's trying to make the audience like be this incisive, journey through this person's life. This is a crowd pleasing movie. This is a movie that has a lot of emotion to it. And I think on that score, if we just look at it purely from a filmmaking and acting perspective, I think it still holds up today. I still think the direction is great. Again, the effects maybe don't age quite as well in some cases, and some of the characters are probably not as well defined or well accepted these days. But still, in all, when you talk about Forrest, you talk about Lieutenant Dan, and to a degree, you're talking about Bubba. This is a very strong core of a movie, and even like it hasn't really been said, but if you can buy the fact that Sally Fields is Forrest's mother, despite the fact that I think she's only like a few years older than him. I want to say it's like 6 or 7 years older, something ridiculous. But, she's also, in her own way, she's wonderful. I mean, she is the heart of what, Forrest, like she's the one who loves him unconditionally from the start. Truly unconditionally, because she's like sleeping with like the superintendent or something to try and get him into the regular classes as opposed to the special school. But she's, in her own way, she's very nice in it too. Great performances, well directed, nice story that pushes the right emotional buttons when it needs to. What more can you ask for?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because there is a part of this movie that did annoy me. And when I say annoy, I mean it genuinely irked me. And I will tell you what it is. And I feel like you, of all people, will appreciate this. My God, the needle drops in this movie are a little bit much. And by a little bit much, I mean a lot of bit much, because some of the songs featured on this soundtrack are, well, let's see, during the Vietnam portion of the movie, we have Fortunate Son. We have, we have Fortunate. There's like every time we're seeing something on screen, we are seeing the most obvious needle drop known to man. Like at one point they show Jenny in San Francisco and they play the Scott McKenzie's San Francisco. Right. And then they play the Young Bloods get together. And it's just like, oh my God, movie. Like, are you fucking, you're like the needle drops don't have to be this on the head. Like they really don't. They're way on
in the running scene that you just talked about. Let's see, Running on Empty. It keeps you running by the Doobies. It's at that. If I'm going to fall
Fleetwood Mac, you can go your own way.
God, Sweet Home Alabama. It's really.
Jesus Christ.
And the thing of it is, like, shortly after I graduated from college, I was clerking at a place called Circuit City. I was working in the CD
A
department.
place called Circuit City, he says.
A little place called
Hey,
Well, they're not around
Harris,
anymore. So.
I was alive when Circuit City was open, man. A place called Circuit City. Red Best Buy. Red Best Buy.
Oh yeah, it was. And it was. I loved it because I got to work in the CD department and I could, whatever. But the point I'm making is that soundtrack was so prevalent. Like that was always on sale because we just sold a shit ton of them. Because if we're gonna like point a finger at the boomers and say like, make accusations that this is pandering to that particular group of people, the exhibit A on that is for sure that double CD soundtrack because it just sold and sold and sold because it almost in some cases in spite of the movie itself, because you had this collection of, anthems that all of these sort of boomer types wanted. Like you said, the Doobie Brothers, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Hendrix, all of these. It was kind of like, an updated version of like Freedom Rock, which was a big thing when I was in high school. I don't know if you'd remember that, but when I was in high school in the 80s, these things always run in 20-year cycles. So that was when like the 60s became like the thing to like look back on fondly. And this was just another example of that. This is like, all right, this was when music was great. Music was awesome. And this is what I want to stick to. And like I said, they sold a shit ton of them, but those needle drops are painful. That's impossible to overstate. So on the nose, so bad.
What's the most on the nose one for you? Because I have my answer and it sticks out not only like a sore thumb, but it feels like it exists solely for the one scene that it's used in the movie. They were like, this one scene, we're going to use this one song and this is where it'll make sense. And it does, but it feels a little cheap.
Ooh, that's a couple. I mean, I do think most of the ones during the running scene, I would say It Keeps You Running is probably the one that I would point to. But I would also say that Freebird during this scene where Jenny is contemplating suicide and she's going to jump off of a building. And, they're basically going through like the fast sort of bit at the end. She, in that moment, I guess you could say she's the free bird who's going to jump off the building. But yeah, for sure, I would say It Keeps You Running by the Doobies because it's got running in the title and that's what he's doing in the scene. He's running. What's your most hated needle drop?
So at one point, Forrest goes to visit Lieutenant Dan in New York City because he's on the Dick Cavett show. And they're walking around late 60s, early 70s New York. And what song plays but Harry Nilsson's Everybody's Talking, because that's the song you think of when you think of late 60s, early 70s New York. And you could have heard me roll my eyes sitting in the room watching the movie. I was like, are you fucking serious? And the scene that they have is Lieutenant Dan being pushed by Forrest in the streets of New York. And of course, they even have him go bang, bang, bang. Hey, I'm walking here. And it's like, you know what, movie? Like, no, you don't get this one. And you don't get to use Harry Nilsson's Everybody's Talking to evoke that. Because when I think of Harry Nilsson's Everybody's Talking, I think of one of two places, LA or New York. But I think more of New York and late 60s, early 70s New York. But that was just like, Jesus. Wow, movie. Wow.
It's bad. And then that's followed when they're in the apartment making out with those women. They cut to Let's Get Together. It's just, it never ends. I mean, you can pick out basically any song you pick out from this movie. It's very easy to understand what's going on in the scene because the title itself will give it away. It's sort of, it's surprising, only in retrospect, like having watched the movie as much as I have, you start to notice those things and you go, wow, that is really, really, that's in a word, that's really artless, in my opinion. It's surprising because, like I said, I hold Zemeckis in such high esteem, but I guess even he's not immune to the lure of the easy needle drop. So, I mean, I said, they sold a fuck ton of these things, these soundtracks. So there's that.
Well, and that's that's the thing, reading about the score and the soundtrack, Zemeckis only wanted American music made by American artists because Forrest Gump wouldn't buy no non-American music. That was literally the answer. And it honestly feels like a who's who of mid 50s to 80, because it's 56 with Elvis to 80 with Bob Seger. And it's like, what, did nobody ever make any good music before or after that? So yeah, you know, they sold this CD as 32 American classics on 2 CDs. Forrest Gump, the soundtrack. And yeah, it is 100% like you said, in a way that I feel like the movie is pandery to a certain generation. The soundtrack is just laser beamed at them. Like, and again, like in a way that the needle drops are almost, and I hate to compare this movie to that movie because this is a good movie and the movie I'm about to compare it to isn't. It is almost Suicide Squad-esque in how bad the needle drops are. Because not only are they bad, and this is the other thing we haven't mentioned, sometimes it's like 10 seconds. Sometimes it's literally 10 to 15 seconds and that's it. And that's when they really start to stand out, is when you've got it boom, 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 boom. It's like, can we hear more than like 2 words or the 3 or 4 words that you can go your own way? All right, now we can switch it up. Da, 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 da. Now we got to switch it up. It's like, you know these songs. Now the Forrest Gump compilation where it's just 10 seconds of each song. But what's funny is when you think of Vietnam and you see those helicopters, you think of the fucking Creedence Clearwater thing, the opening of Fortunate Son. Like, come on, like movie, you don't, just because you've gotten everything else doesn't mean you have to be that on the nose now. Like, it's not a requirement.
No, I agree. And in that, it's funny because right around that time, I want to say, what was Pulp Fiction, I think, was probably sometime around 93, 94. Am I wrong about that? 92, 93, 94. I always thought, not to get into a Tarantino thing, but Tarantino was always smarter, much smarter in the way that he compiled his soundtracks. We're going to actually be talking about this on an episode of Noise Junkies coming up soon. But there's something to be said for a very creatively curated a soundtrack, like something like, I mean, it's cliche now, but Pulp Fiction in its day was kind of revelatory in that way, because it really eschewed all of the things that Forrest Gump kind of embraced, which is the easy needle drop that not only does it comment on the scene subtextually, perhaps, but the fucking title is describing exactly what's going on screen at that moment. So if nothing else, I really appreciated Tarantino for the panache that he brought to the sort of curated soundtrack collection, which clearly Zemeckis didn't care because, to your point, he had a very specific, directive, which is this is all American music and it has to comment on the scene that it's being portrayed in. Even if it's just there for 10 seconds, it has to comment on that scene, which, if I'm going to level a finger and say that this really hasn't aged well, that's probably the worst offense that I can think of right off the top of my head. That has nothing to do with political subtext or any of that sort of stuff.
I mean, every single one of the songs by every single one of the artists is the song that you would name if you were naming if I said to you, "Hey, HP, name me a Mamas and Papas song." You know what I mean? Like,
it would be. Oh yeah, of course, yeah. It'd be like, if you're going to have a Mama and the Papa song, it would be California Dreamin'.
Right.
Of course, it has to be.
Right. And name a Simon and Garfunkel song, Mrs. Robinson. Like, it's that lazy. It's like, and again, like, there's a reason that this soundtrack got to the Billboard #2, which is insane in and of itself. So yeah, that was the biggest thing that irked me about the movie, was just how just like overbearing the soundtrack was. That and Robin Wright. Because again, I don't have any love for Robin Wright. She's not an actress that I necessarily resonate with or have really seen in a lot of things other than this and House of Cards. And I guess she was in Unbreakable, but she's not someone that I've seen in a lot of things. And I guess she's fine in Toys, the movie she did before this one, which I actually have a huge amount of love for. But she's also an actress that just doesn't, again, like, kind of like Sharon Stone, like, doesn't do it for me. So those are the two big things that really irk me with the movie. But I think for me, the soundtrack is probably the worst part of this movie, like, unequivocally. Like, if you want to have an issue with the whole, is Forrest like a character that's problematic in the way he's portrayed, I get it, want to go there, fine. But the music in this movie is actually an affront, a genuine affront. And in a way that if you're watching this movie, you can't overlook it. There's no way you can overlook it because it's such an like you've mentioned, in an integral part of the movie because it is subtextual and a lot of the times it's presented.
It is, and it's in a way it's dismaying how successful it was, because what does that say about the movie going public as a whole? They want, at least in this case, they wanted what was already very familiar to them. Like they wanted to buy these songs that they probably already had bought 8 times over, having lived through the era that's portrayed in the movie. So
I mean, you don't like hearing Buffalo Springfield for the 8 millionth time when they show Vietnam stuff? Like, fuck you guys. Fuck you guys. Come on.
It's lazy. That may be the worst sort of sin you can engage in this type of thing. It's lazy. They could have, there's any number. That's the reason why. I think part of the reason why you see these same songs over and over and over again, because they're probably much easier to license too. They're probably, a lot more straightforward to license, say, like, a Jackson Brown song or Simon and Garfunkel, because they're always being licensed. You see them in all of these movies that take place during this time period. But again, like, it doesn't make it any less sort of dismaying to understand how bad the soundtrack is and how poorly it's executed, and yet they sold 1 million of these things. Like clearly the public responded at large with a resounding "Give me more, give me more. I love this," which is kind of a shame because it's not a good soundtrack. It's not a good soundtrack at all.
No, but I do want to talk about the last part of Forrest Gump ephemera that will never not crack me up. I have open in front of me right now the menu for Bubba Gump Shrimp Co. in New York City. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. If you didn't know because you've never been to Times Square, there's a Bubba Gump Shrimp Co. in downtown New York, straight right in the heart of things, right there in Times Square, right next to a cheesecake factory and probably Guy Fieri's fucking restaurant. So I just wanted to ask you, have you been to a Bubba Gump Shrimp Co.?
I have not. I've certainly walked past any number of them. I have seen this place before. I remember we went on a trip to Universal Studios in Florida, and there it is. And there's some really good restaurants on the what's it called, like
City
Walk or something. And but goddamn, there's Bubba Gump, and wouldn't you know it, they've got a line down the block. People love they love the familiar, I guess. That's what they want.
I mean, there's the Bubba Gump is probably right next to the Margaritaville.
Probably, yeah. Absolutely. Maybe there used to be a Kenny Rogers Roasters, but that went out of business. So maybe, Bubba Gump comes in and takes its place. Have you ever eaten at a Bubba Gump?
I feel like at one point in my life, I have to have. It has not been within recent memory, but I wanted, I was looking at the menu because, again, should we ever find a time to all of us meet up? Bubba Gump obviously has more than enough seating for a large group of people. And so I was looking at the menu to try to suss out, because again, Father Malone and I have talked about this, and I'm sure you would agree. If I were to do a movie themed restaurant, I would commit completely to the gimmick. There's a place in Omaha called the Monster Club that Father Malone and I went to with my wife when he came and visited last year. And it's passively themed, but it's not a cohesive theme. Forrest Gump, Bubba Gump Restaurant, it's not what it's called, but Bubba Gump & Co. reminded me more of, like, again, if you look at it from the inside, it looks like a Planet Hollywood, but like Forrest Gump theme, pretty much. Because, again, they have costumes from the movie and they're playing the movie. And it's not like you walk in there and it's like people are dressed up like Forrest Gump and it's replaying the movie. It's essentially like a Joe's Crab Shack, because I believe it's owned by Landry's, who owns Joe's Crab Shack and other fine dining establishments, like, I don't know, a lot of the ones that are connected to aquariums in this country, including but not limited to the other most well-known themed restaurant I can think of, Rainforest Cafe. So, again, like, I'm looking at the menu, just trying to suss out why in God's name, a sampler for adults is $22. The Run Across America sampler, featuring such delights as Bubba's Far Out Dip and Maker's Mark bourbon sauce. But the funny thing is the menu is not as themed as I thought it would be. It's not as exciting as I thought it would. There's not as many jokes and gags and funny ha-has that you would assume when you have a Forrest Gump restaurant.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm trying to pull up the menu here, and I didn't see a lot of like. I think I saw like a chicken run sandwich, but I think there's something regional because some of the other menus don't have the same menu. I see Bubba's Far Out Dip, Run Across America sampler. That's what you just talked about. Yeah, I that's my impression. Like I said, I've never eaten there, but just casually walking by, it wasn't like somebody's like your waiter's dressed up in the white Forrest Gump suit as he's waiting at the bus, or like in a I don't know, an army uniform or something, like running with Lieutenant Dan on his back. But
he's a waiter in a wheelchair with no legs. That, my friend, would be the pinnacle of themed dining. Dining would be someone dressed up like Lieutenant Dan, because that would not go over well.
That would be. I think I'd have to leave. I could not. I couldn't even deal with that.
They wouldn't even be able to be open. I mean,
no.
But hey, they've got ping pong chicken pasta on the menu for $21, and you can round out your meal with a delicious dessert, because of course it's a Forrest Gump restaurant, and of course it's based off of the movie, so they're offering a box of chocolates for dessert.
A box of chocolates, nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think like what other movie themed restaurants have there really been, or celebrity themed restaurants? I can't think of too many. I mean, this is pretty bold. I mean, you have to hand it to them that it's a very sort of slim conceit, but they've been in business for how long now? Like 20 years?
Since 1996.
It's incredible. I can only assume that the food must be at least passable, if not decent. I mean, that's expensive though. Those are pretty high prices.
I mean, but that's the thing. It's not any, you mentioned seeing it at the Universal Studios City Walk. And that, I think, for me, when I think of Bubba Gump Co., the Christian name for the restaurant, I think for me, that's what I think of when I think of restaurants like Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. It's a chain restaurant that is more or less always in a spot that is close to water, or a tourist destination. Like, I believe they have one at whatever the pier is in San Francisco. They have one there. They have one in Times Square. They have it at Universal Studios. It isn't even a Universal movie, is it? Like, this is a fucking Paramount film.
It's Paramount. Yeah.
But to your point, like,
Paramount movie.
This movie, the food must not be that bad because it's still around. But I think I mentioned Bubba Gump Shrimp Co. because it's the thing that I wanted to bring up as we bring this episode to a close is this movie was a fucking cultural phenomenon when it came out. And one of those extensions of that is 34 locations still in business to this day of Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, a restaurant based off of a movie from 1994. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's incredible.
That's insane.
It's because you would figure, although the movie endures, the cultural impact has long since dissipated. So it's not like, if you have someone coming in from out of town, let's say you live in near one of these locations, or if you're on the Universal City Walk or whatever, it's not something that would easily come to my mind. Like, hey, let's go check out Bubba Gump because you love that movie Forrest Gump so much. I have to believe, like I said, like the food has to be at least pretty decent for it to have such a long. I mean, it's outlived the movie. Let's be honest. It's been 20 plus years or what have you since '96. That's pretty remarkable. So I don't know. Maybe it's like another iteration of the Cheesecake Factory, because for anything you can say about the Cheesecake Factory, the fact is you can take any 5 people to the Cheesecake Factory and everybody will find something they like on that menu. That menu is seriously, it's like 50 pages long, right? So, it may not be fine dining, but it's good and everyone will be happy at the end of the meal. Maybe if you get people in town who have a craving for seafood and you don't want to go to some fancy restaurant, maybe Bubba Gump is the ticket for you. I don't know.
That's what it should say on the window. Maybe Bubba Gump is the ticket for you.
Like,
put that on a fucking t-shirt right there. That'll be it. We'll sell Weirding Way Media shirts, and it'll just be a shrimp that looks like one of us just saying, maybe it's good. maybe this will be for you. God. I'm sure they sell plenty of hats because they sell red hats, which is unfortunate in this day and age. But hey, they're Bubba Gump hats, not the other kind of hat. But, I think ultimately it's just another weird kind of piece of ephemera connected to a movie that Weird Al based one of his songs off of, one of his better songs from the 90s, one of my favorite songs. And,
right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's weird is Forrest Gump is not just the movie. It's the soundtrack, which you had a story about, which is Bubba Gump, the restaurant, which we could sit here and continue to talk about probably because, hey, ping pong chicken pasta. I mean, those kinds of ideas don't come by every day, but it's crazy because like you said, in a lot of ways, everything outlived Forrest Gump. Like, the box of chocolates thing, like life is like a box of chocolates. Like you could say that to somebody who's never seen the movie and they would know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's like a cultural, it's like it's a cultural piece of cultural DNA that has just, I think those quotes are like, registered in like the AFI like film quote registry like that. And, stupid is as stupid does. You can pick out any of these quotes and it speaks to the enduring cultural impact of this movie. And there's no greater exponent of that than the fact that this is wacky restaurant, which is a paper thin connection to the movie. Let's be honest. You could have the same restaurant, call everything else by a different name, and it would just be an ordinary seafood restaurant. But the fact that you put that twist on it, it's got the Bubba Gump hats. It's got maybe some, ephemera from the film sets, costumes and so forth. And now you've got something. I mean, that's kind of what made Planet Hollywood such a sensation for so long, or not so long, but for the time that it was a sensation, or Hard Rock Cafe, right? The food is okay, but if you want to go see, I don't know, like a bass drum head from the band Foreigner, it's on the wall. There you go. If it's worth it, go for it,
I did want to close this episode before I ask you final thoughts on Forrest Gump. To answer that question you asked from before, I don't know if there are any other movie-based restaurants. But I will ask you, if someone gave you the opportunity to make your own movie-themed restaurant, sell me on it. Tell me what it would be. The HP movie-branded restaurant would be.
It's going to be super. I got to warn you, it's going to be super obscure. And this is the first thing that came to my mind. I don't know why this popped into my mind, but I have offline. I've talked to you about this. One of my favorite movies as a kid called The Idolmaker, which takes place in basically the late 50s, early 60s. And in the movie, the main character, his older brother, has an Italian restaurant called Mario's. And if you watch the movie, Mario's is filmed and portrayed, and it's not like they don't linger in Mario's, but it looks like such a fucking cool place. It's got like it's an Italian restaurant with a red banquette seating, and the food looks great. And there's a scene where the main character is making his own Caesar salad dressing tableside. It looks so fucking cool, and the food looks so good for what you see. I think I would make Mario's. I think I would make Mario's from The Idolmaker that no one would get the reference but me, but I would love it. I would eat there all the time. That would be my restaurant. Some obscure restaurant from some obscure musical from 1980.
A restaurant of one for you. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Chris?
I was thinking about it because, again, like it's an interesting question because these themed restaurants are they're a thing that doesn't exist anymore. It's like a thing of a bygone era. I mean, we still have these weird kind of artifacts still hanging around. I mean, we still have, we mentioned Rainforest Cafe, Bubba Gump still exists. Yeah. So, I mean, they're still out there. They're still kicking around, and people do still go to them. I mean, it's not like people aren't going to them. It's not like people aren't interested in enjoying. Again, I don't know what the motivation is. So, just sitting here and racking my brain and trying to think, well, hey, if I had the opportunity, if someone gave me the money and said, hey, go make a restaurant based off of a movie or a property or something that you really like, but it would have to be, again, it has to be an experience where you're getting something that you've kind of always wanted in a way that you're not expecting. And I would have thought, maybe let's do like a Jurassic Park themed restaurant, but that already exists. There's a place called T-Rex. It's owned by Landry's, and it is like Rainforest Cafe, but with dinosaurs. For me, and this is me thinking in a way that would scratch the itch of the inner child, but also be something kind of fun and unique and interesting, I would totally do like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles restaurant in like a sewer. And
like a pizza place?
Like a pizza place, but you have to enter in a way that makes it interesting. There is an interesting mechanic to which you get into the restaurant, like a tiki bar or an underground speakeasy, and then it has good pizza. But there aren't turtles dancing around and shit. There's none of that bullshit like Rainforest Cafe. It's in the place, but not like, again, we talked with Bubba Gump. It's not like they've got Forrest Gump walking around. I wouldn't want the turtles taking my meal, but it would be one of those things where you're in a spot that's interesting. You're in their headquarters, in their lair, what have you, but you get to eat pizza in the sewers like a turtle, but in a space that has, kind of tiki bar adjacent. I think that could be fun.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds, it's funny when you were saying that, and I think that is actually a really great. I can envision that, like you have to climb down like a ladder from a sewer to get in there. That would be so cool. But to a certain degree, I think some of this, the flavor of what a themed restaurant has been kind of co-opted by like Universal Studios, like theme parks. Like I remember when I took my family to go to Hogwarts, right? So, you're walking through Hogsmeade basically, and you're eating in like the Three Broomsticks. It may not be like a film, reference quality meal that they would eat in the Harry Potter movies. But I mean, you're in like they take great pains to make it look like you're in, the Three Broomsticks or Honeydukes or any of these like stores that you're kind of in. So there's an element of that, I think. I think that concept lives on as part of the theme park experience, I think.
Well, I mean, you go one step further with Star Wars, the Star Wars land, you can go to Mos Eisley and have a drink in the canteen.
Yep, exactly.
I think you're right. I think that it obviously has gone in a different direction, but it's gone in a direction where it can be supported by the people who are already doing things like that, by making the impossible possible. Because, hey, I've been to the Jekyll and Hyde Club when they had one in Dallas at the big mall, the mall that had all the other things that were big draws, like Rainforest Cafe, like GameWorks, like all these things that were meant to get you to come and spend your whole day there. Jekyll and Hyde Club was one of them, and that place was fine, but they don't have the legs that Gump and Co. did. So so there you go. So HP, I will kick it to you to give a opportunity for a final thought on the film that spawned not just a restaurant, but also a sequel that takes it down, Forrest Gump.
I just the word that comes to mind after our discussion is it's a sturdy picture. Again, putting aside all of the baggage that it's taken on for good or bad over the last some odd years, 20 years, it still holds up. I still get choked up at certain points in the movie, and it's well made, well acted, well written. It's like a workhorse. It's sturdy. It still does what it does, and it does it well.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a movie that's kind of been a long time coming. I mean, again, I read the book last year and I enjoyed it, but I knew that the movie was obviously markedly different. And yeah, Tom Hanks puts the movie on his back and he shoulders the weight of the movie up that mountain. But the mountain was not that steep. This is I think the story and the narrative that they're telling has a curbside appeal for a certain group of people that the movie knew it was going to appeal to. And in doing what they did, they leaned as hard on that group as they could, and that group paid off in dividends. This movie was immensely successful. But again, it also spawns a restaurant and a whole host of cultural reference points and a soundtrack that, again, all these things come from this movie and movies that would end up being inspired by this movie. I feel like The Waterboy is a literal ripoff of this movie, and it's the joke version of this movie in a lot of ways, which I had never thought about until I finally sat down and watched Forrest Gump, because again, the DNA of Forrest Gump is in everything post Forrest Gump in a lot of ways. It changed the way movies were made. It changed the expectations in a lot of ways of how you can portray characters. And I think it did harm and it did good. And again, I think in a lot of ways, it's never going to do both either. It's never going to do both very well, but it does do both by making it an interesting movie that tries to be as unproblematic in as many ways as possible. And I think it achieves that. Like you said, it's a movie that has persisted for almost over 20 years now. And I think 20, 30, 40 years from now, Bubba Gump will still be around. It'll still be kicking around. People will be still saying "Lop is like a box of chocolates." They'll be still saying it incorrectly, just like they're saying "Luke, I am your father" incorrectly. It's part of the DNA of our Western American pop culture, because Forrest Gump is, in a lot of ways, the idealized American for good and for bad. So that's where we leave Forrest Gump, and we'll take a moment and play a preview for the next Culture Cast coming your way. Right, on the next Culture Cast, for the first one of March, we're going to be talking about, it's not problematic at all. We're going to be talking about Roman Polanski's Pirates, because, hey, you mentioned the name Polanski and people are just beating down the door to say nice things about the guy, or so I've been told. And on that episode, I'll be joined by my good friend Jess Byard, the co-host of Scary Stories We Tell, and someone who's a lot more academic than me, all the way from the Midwest, Mr. Spencer Parsons will be joining us as well. So until then, HP, where can people find you on the internet should they want to track you down?
Excellent. Well, I am in several shows on this very network, the Weirding Way Network. I am the co-host of the Wolf Raisin Banachek podcast. I am the co-host of the Night Mr. Walters at Taxi podcast. You can hear me periodically doing guests on this very podcast, the Kulturecast. And you can hear my music every once in a while. I do some music on Astounding Tales of the Public Domain. The bumpers you've heard, I've done that, and a few other things here and there. I'm kind of all over the network. Much appreciated.
He's a multi-talent, this one.
I try.
And you succeed.
Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, of course. Hey, man, give credit where credit is due. I'm glad that you were like, and the bumpers you're hearing every episode. Hey,
that's
man.
Me.
Yeah, hell yeah. As for me, you can find me, like Harris mentioned, over at the Weirding Way Media Network, where you're finding this show and so many other shows that you should totally be listening to, obsessing over, and telling your friends about. Those shows would include The Projection Booth, which is a movie podcast where they talk about movies seriously, unlike us, where we're half serious. We're half cocked, as they would say. We're half of a cock here. Maybe we don't say that. That's a terrible term. We're not going to say half cocked, but you can also find, like Harris mentioned, Father Malone and his Wolf and Raisin. And let's just mention another random show, because why not? Twisted and Uncorked, two women who are a lot funnier than me. And hey, we all know how hard that is. Just kidding. I'm not that funny. But that's where you can find those shows and so many other shows at weirdingwaymedia.com.
I would also be remiss, by the way, if I did not mention Noise Junkie, the newest show that I've been involved with myself, Heather Drain, and Father Malone. Listen to it. It'll change your life. Thank you. Especially if you're a fan of Joe Pesci's musical career. Indeed. And as for this show, Kulturecast.com, Patreon.com/Kulturecast, all the places you can go to get the show or donate financially, however you want to. But hey, if you can't do that, like, rate, and review the show wherever you get it, which is probably iTunes. So help us out there, because it helps us find our audience, and it helps our audience find good movie conversation, I guess. HP, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.